everybody. Welcome to part 2 of episode 4 of the Garden Revival BBQ. In part 1, we talked to landscape architect Caleb Melchior about his experience in landscape design. And now, Caleb, Joseph, Passy, and Zappy answer our members' big burning questions. Take it away, Space Butler.
Bon Clay Yokum Away asks, can I take cuttings from a magnolia tree that has buds and let it blossom in a vase full of just water?
I'm not a plant propagator, but I don't think that magnolias typically root very well just in water. I think you would want a different soil medium for them, but that also depends on which magnolia species you're dealing with.
I think they're asking about maybe forcing a branch to bloom. In that case, I think you can. I think by this time, by March, I think they'll be ready to go and you can get them to bloom. And other plants that work like that, I've done that with forsythias.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, pretty much any woody tree or shrub that blooms really early in the spring makes its flowers in the fall and then just waits through the winter to flower, and you can force them like that. But yeah, like Caleb was saying, you can't cut the root. You're not going to root the cutting of that magnolia and get it to grow to a new tree, at least not very easily. They're usually grafted, but certainly can force them into bloom that way.
Okay. Velociraptor asks, how do bulbs or underground tubers not rot when they have some viable shoots, but something that doesn't have shoots or isn't mature enough to regrow does not? Once I planted 3 potatoes, 2 of them rotted. I dug one up and saw a teeny tiny growth, and that potato hadn't rotted. So I guess this is a question about, like, you know, you plant the same thing in the same soil. Why do some of them rot and some of them don't, for potatoes at least?
Remember the thing I said about knowing when you don't know and asking an expert who knows more? You need to talk to a horticulturist or a bulb expert for that.
Yeah, I think Joseph can handle this one.
Yeah, I think with the specifics of they planted 3 potatoes and 2 of them rotted, I think that's sometimes it's just dumb luck, you know, about what soil organisms were in the soil. And so often, even if the conditions are right for stuff to rot, you know, not 100% of them is going to rot. But I would say that in general, most bulbs, when they're dormant, are going to be most of your bulbs are evolutionarily adapted to survive a dry season. So your tulips and daffodils and all of that stuff, they're storing food in that bulb to get through usually dry periods or sometimes cold periods. And often in a dry period, they don't need to be resisting rot because it's really dry. And when you try to grow those bulbs in a wet climate and they are sitting wet when they're dormant, often they are far more prone to rot than they would be when they're actively growing, just because that dormant period is usually not a time when the organisms that would cause them to be rotting are very active. So as a rule of thumb, whatever's dormant and not actively growing will often be more susceptible to rot and stuff, because usually that dormant period is, if the ground's frozen or the ground's really dry, they don't need to be set up to resist those, disease-causing organisms because they're also dormant.
And I think from the way Velociraptor phrased this question, the tubers that didn't rot already had some shoots coming up off of them, so that means they weren't dormant. They were starting to grow, they needed water, whereas the ones still dormant could have rotted from overwatering. That's what it sounds like.
And that's a good rule of thumb with whether it's, if you have houseplants or stuff outside or whatever. If they're not actively growing, ease up on the water if you have that ability. And then when they're actively growing, water more. It usually will help things be a little bit healthier.
Okay. So Moriel has a landscape design question. Do you believe that landscape design should reflect the architecture of the house? My house has a modern ranch style, but I like Japanese gardens. So currently, the Japanese garden is secluded from the rest of the garden. I wonder if it's possible to unify different styles guided by different principles, or is it somewhat set in stone that different styles cannot be harmonized?
So I think the answer to that is that, I would go back to that kind of work with feeling. So I think this depends on how literal versus abstract you want it to be. you want to work with the overall like form and shape of your house, right? Like if your house is a ranch, you probably don't want to put some kind of massive tree in front that makes your house feel tiny. You want to work overall with the shape and proportion to like emphasize the things that you like about your house. But when you're thinking especially about the combination that you have, where you're thinking about a Japanese garden in relationship to ranch houses, a lot of those modernist landscapes that were created around the time that most ranch houses were built in like the 1950s and 60s have that mid-century modern style that was really influenced by Japanese aesthetics, especially. And so I think you could really easily meld together, you know, maybe the portion of your garden that is kind of supposed to be this secluded Japanese garden is, you know, still it's kind of its own thing. But I think you could use the elements that it sounds like you like about a Japanese garden in the rest of your landscape. So maybe you use a really consistent material as a mulch. Maybe you have plants kind of used sculpturally where there's space around them. You know, you could do some really beautifully cloud-pruned plants to emphasize the mass of your house. So I think there's always a challenge between, you know, how dedicated you are to a concept and especially how you specifically want to realize that concept in your landscape, and then how much you want to, like, depending on the space that you have available, how much you want to like create different experiences through the site, like across your site. I personally am a very like, my personal aesthetic is that I like spaces that don't look like they've really been designed. Like look kind of overgrown and like on the edge of chaos. And so I'm always trying to hide the design intent, right? And really soften it and make it look naturalistic. And so I really want my landscapes to feel coherent and hold together, where you don't notice these kind of jarring transitions. But and so that may be the approach that you want to use, right? Where it kind of melts your existing context into your landscape. That also really depends on the specific site that you have. Sorry, everything I'm saying is it depends, which isn't necessarily
it's always a safe answer.
But it has a lovely big property with lots of spaces, lots of trees, and a creek, I believe. So I think she can go to town.
So yeah, but in that, okay, but the more of what I'm thinking about is how artificial the context of your landscape is. So I work in a place that has this really incredible natural landscape, right? So most of the time I really want to blend the edges. I want the gardens that I'm creating to really merge into that surrounding landscape, because that's something you want to celebrate. If you're in a suburban neighborhood that, you know, you don't feel like you need to merge into that much, you can go for that really extreme contrast. So, or, you know, say you live on like a city block or have a lot that's kind of isolated, then do whatever the hell you want. But generally, the answer to your question is, I think you could make it work. Just maybe you simplify it and don't make it super Japanese-y materials like directly around the house, but let it still be informed by the same kind of concepts and overall aesthetic.
All right.
I love that answer. And I just want to add, looking at the way interior designers design spaces, they tend not to go for a super isolated style. They really try to mix in elements of everything to make, you know, for one, to make it unique to the resident, to make it feel like home for them. And I think you should do that outdoors too.
I think the other thing that's really important about Japanese gardens is about how you move through them, right? Because they're sort of this really, I haven't had the opportunity to go to Japan yet, so I've only seen Japanese gardens in the United States and then, you know, videos and documentation of them in Japan. But my understanding is that they're typically designed for this kind of really choreographed experience where you have specific views that get set up, and as you move through the garden you get this really wonderful different suggestion of different things where you kind of get glimpses of things, and then you move through the garden and you get a different view. So you could definitely follow that approach as you're designing. If you have this wonderful property that has like a stream, I think you definitely want to think about that experience of how you move through that space and what you see along the way.
All right. Now we're moving to a question from Yuki about when to harvest sweet potatoes. I kept missing them and got tiny tubers. Anybody have experience with harvesting sweet potatoes?
Well, I will take that one because I've definitely had the same experience with sweet potatoes. The first time I grew sweet potatoes, I had these huge vines, and then I was so excited, and then I went to harvest, and all I had was these tiny little things. So the thing about sweet potatoes is less about timing. They need a good 3 months at least to produce tubers, but longer is better generally if you're in a warm climate. Um, but as the vines grow from where you planted, as they grow along, they will root into the ground all along their length. And if you let them root into the ground, they will try to make little tiny tubers along the length of the whole vine, and none of them will get big. So usually, if you're getting little tiny sweet potatoes, if as long as you've given them a few months, a good few months of warm conditions to grow, it's usually because they're rooted along. So what you have to do is just periodically go out and lift up those vines that are growing along the ground, and sever any roots that have rooted along the length, so that all the energy of the vines is going back to the main stem to get you some nice big fat sweet potatoes down at the base of the plant.
Well, that's interesting.
Oh, that's a good tip. So you gotta concentrate the sweet potato essence.
Yes, otherwise they'll make a lot of teeny tiny little ones rather than big fat ones all together in the center. Yeah.
All right. Joseph asks, how do those of us who have a strong plant collector's urge make a good-looking landscape? Any way to incorporate a wildly diverse group of plants into a harmonious design?
So I think the way that I would approach that is starting to really think about a couple of things. So one, I would really think about how you arrange your garden. So maybe you have specific areas that are really like chock-a-block with your one of this and one of that. And those become like little gallery areas where you can really like appreciate all the details of those specific plants. And then maybe you have other areas that are a little bit more serene and have kind of, maybe you have a collection of tree peonies that are all kind of different colors, but they're relatively uniform in the way they look as plants for most of the year. Like, dedicate an area to those, and then have your like collection of every succulent that you have from different parts of Madagascar and South Africa, like have that as its own little display. So like try to connect things by kind of the ecosystems or the regions that they're from, so that they kind of at least have a similar physical form. You can also unify things by using color. So, maybe you have a certain area of your garden that's dedicated to all your variegated plants. You have another area that's kind of things that are hot colors. Maybe you have another area that are things that are cool colors. I think thinking about the edges of your beds and how they relate to your space and they shape space is also really important. So maybe you can kind of arrange them in different ways. I think this is one of the reasons that in kind of really traditional horticultural display gardens, you end up seeing a lot of lawns because it is this kind of calm, green, unified space. So I think really also playing with the contrast of where do you have areas that are kind of dark and just foliage and just green versus areas that are more colorful can be really useful. The other thing, I had something else and it completely escaped my memory. So yeah, I think it's trying to find some unity and some order within everything that you're doing. Is a way to bring something that feels like design intent. Oh, I know what it was that I was going to say. Also, just try to, if your plants are all going to be really different, try to maintain a lot of consistency with your other materials. So make sure that all of your beds are edged in the same way. You use mulch, like the same mulch throughout your entire garden. Like, create coherence with the other materials, and then the plants can kind of be wild and crazy and whatever you want.
See, this is why I love English gardens. Anything goes. You can make anything work from any plant from any place in the world, but there is structure to it. So you can fit everything in within that structure. You can go wild within that structure.
Yeah, and
But
if
you
in
gotta have
doubt,
that.
put a row or like a hedge of dwarf yopon in front of it, and that'll solve a multitude of sins. They use boxwood all over the place in English gardens. Here in the southeast United States, yopon is pretty similar. Like, just put that Ilex vomitoria nana in, and you can establish some really cheap aesthetic coherence that way.
Have you guys seen what Floret is doing with her growing space?
No, I don't think I have Wait, are you talking about Florette Flower Farm, or are you talking about a
Yes,
user?
yes,
I haven't seen any
yes.
images of
Florette
her
Flower Farm.
of the farm recently. I know
So she's got the farm, but she is sort of putting in hedgerows, is what she's calling them, with sort of mixed plantings to
cool.
basically create a garden out of the farm. So she actually brought a designer from England who's been working on that. And there are arches, trellises in between the rows. So I feel like that creates the structure, and you can have all sorts of different plantings in the, I don't know, squares, rectangles between those.
Yeah, definitely. Establishing some kind of a geometric order to your garden, like whether it's established through paths, can be a really nice way of offsetting a more like complicated or chaotic kind of planting style for sure.
Cool.
Okay, Xenogerm asks, we can now experience false spring in Zone 9A. Lots of my plants will emerge from dormancy and begin to put out new growth once temperatures rise into the 70s. Should we take precautions to protect new growth initiated by a false spring, or allow the new growth to die back once frost returns?
Well, this depends on what you're trying to grow. So zone, let's see, 9A, you're going to be at that's like a really cuspy zone, right? Where you're barely getting they've got to be either like Panhandle or Gulf Coast somewhere, or Southern California.
He is in Louisiana.
Okay. So the big challenge for the whole Gulf Coast to down here is that because of climate change, we are consistently getting much more extreme weather fluctuations. So 20 years ago, people had much more consistent summer rain, winter cold spells. You got cold snaps every once in a while. Louisiana, especially this year, has gotten really bad freezes like in New Orleans. And so they're going to be seeing over the next, 10, 20, however long, we're probably going to be getting this more and more. And so, I would really think about, okay, what established zones of what are basically the things that are likely to be really damaged, and then what are the things that are likely to recover on their own, and put your effort into protecting kind of your most precious things. So if it's, if it's a hand-me-down from your grandmother or something you spent a lot of money on a plant sale that is probably going to be damaged, put a lot of effort into taking care of that. If it's something that you can easily replace, or it's one of your native plants that usually snaps back really easily, don't worry about it. So you pick the priorities. I don't think that there's a consistent way across your garden to just treat everything the same way.
I think you also have to look into what the plant is. Like if it's a hosta, once the leaves are damaged, they're damaged for the whole year.
Yeah, absolutely. Definitely looking at the life cycle of the plants. But honestly, so if they're in Louisiana, you're not going to have a lot of stuff that kind of does that one flush for the year. Some of your cycads, I feel like, would be at your limit of what's kind of flushing. You may also lose bloom on things like, camellias especially. You may get hit by a cold snap and lose your flower for this year. Probably the same thing with magnolias. But honestly, this is a good time to start to notice what those plants are and decide, okay, if you have some giant ass Magnolia soulangeana that gets knocked off and doesn't flower every third year, is it really worth giving that plant 40 feet of space in your garden if you're going to consistently have this over the next 20 years, the way that those plants always perform in the Midwest?
This is exactly the reason I'm afraid to get a magnolia. I'm afraid a late frost will just, it'll start putting out growth and it'll get zapped and I won't get anything that year.
They do look like the Soulangeanas do look amazing with when they're in bloom though. But I do feel like some of the yellow ones, like butterfly, are less likely to they bloom a little later.
Yeah, butterfly is definitely, I think, a better. Yeah, some of those hybrids and the girl series.
Yeah.
The little flora hybrids are the later bloomers. but they just don't have the same impact of a good Solangiana that just, I mean, it's like every 3 years around here they have a good bloom, and when they do, you're like, oh my god, it's worth it. If it's only 3, not in my yard, but my neighbors have them, so I just enjoy them.
Exactly.
That's the best way to enjoy it. Borrowed view.
1,000%. Join the tree planting campaign in your neighborhood and have everyone else plant the trees that you want to enjoy but you don't want to take care of.
Alternatively, right. Can I just dedicate an hour out of my week to just sitting and staring at my neighbor's lawn and enjoying my neighbor's lawn, seeing what grows there?
Oh yeah, have your garden be as messy as possible and just count the neighbor's lawns as the foil to your space. I'm on board with that.
That sounds like a bargain too, honestly.
Either that or really creepy. I don't know.
I mean, also, I feel like I should flag, when I say lawn, I don't mean golf course grass. If, you can still have the aesthetic effect of a lawn, but you do not. No one needs to be spraying their lawn or fertilizing it every 2 years. It's grass. One of the most, besides mushrooms, it's one of the most successful organisms on the planet. Grasses have persuaded humans to spread them all over the world through agriculture, right? They don't really need help. A few sedges and forbs in your lawn space are not going to be that big of an aesthetic distraction. Sure, just every 2 weeks of that 3 to 4 inch thing, you're still going to get the same aesthetic effect. Let it brown out a little bit in the summer or whatever your dry season is. It's going to be fine. There is absolutely no reason to try to maintain this perfect, pristine thing, except for exercising your inner demons.
You have no idea how contentious the subject is on the server.
Also, you haven't seen our lawn. It's in
horrendous shape.
Some bad shape. There's some
I don't know what's
creatures
happening.
that like to.
It's been dug.
Just destroy the lawn. So let's move on. Team Valor.
Some critters like to burrow, you mean?
Yeah,
Maybe.
Critters, yes.
I don't know if it's grubs or what they're looking for, but it is bad right now.
Yeah. Okay. Xenogerm asks, many plants are listed as annual and sometimes tagged perennial in zones XYZ. There are times when some plants are listed as annual, grows perennial in some regions, but do not have this indication. Is there any way to easily identify which plants will grow as perennials?
Oh, so the short answer is no. Every plant species has its own life cycle, right? And so this is, again, where looking at different wild plant communities and observing them over time can be really helpful. Or just do some doing online research. But it depends on the climate that you live in and whether that, how that plant specifically behaves in your ecological conditions. So here in the subtropics and through the tropics, a lot of plants that are grown as annuals in cold winter climates, can go for multiple years. But a lot of plants that flower really heavily or have really showy flowers are disturbance species. And so even if they're technically perennial, individual plants don't live that long. They may live 2 or 3 years. And so that can be really, or the other thing is it can be like a hibiscus, and sure, they will never die. They'll live forever, but their actual flowering period when they produce the most and the best flowers is when they're 2 to 5 years old. And after that, they just start to get really woody. And so, it sounds like to me you're trying to figure out if there are specific species that you can get to live for multiple years in your specific climate zone. And so that would mostly be things that are kind of borderline hardy. A lot of herbaceous plants, you can bump them up a couple of hardiness zones by mulching them or putting them in a protected space. But in that case, it really depends on what your specific climate conditions are again. So, if you're in somewhere that is a zone 6 where things where you have short springs that change really, where you have a lot of false springs, you're probably going to have tender stuff get lost every couple years. I know in my parents' garden in the Ozarks, I could grow Aloysia virgata by mulching it, and it came back for like 3 or 4 years, which because it's like technically a zone 8 plant, I guess. But then we had like a cold snap one year and it got frosted early. But also, it's lemon verbena. Like, you can buy that for $3 at any shop, so it's not that big of a deal. I guess I'm trying to think about what the intent of your question is, and again, it kind of just comes down to context and the specific things you're trying to grow.
I think part of the difficulty in figuring out what's an annual and what's a perennial is the way nurseries, garden centers label the plants. Things that are locally to you, not going to come back the next year, are labeled as annual when they're not annuals at all. They're just tender perennials.
And I think I would say if you're in a cold climate, you get freezing temperatures in the winter, and you go to a garden center and you're buying stuff labeled as annuals, virtually all of those, I'm trying to think of any, virtually all of those are not annuals in the straight sense. They would survive longer without a hard freeze, just because the true annuals are pretty difficult to fit into sort of the horticultural supply chain. So, your classic impatiens petunias, all that kind of stuff, would perform. They're not strict annuals. But if you're shopping for seeds, that's where you're probably going to be able to buy actual true annuals, like sunflowers, some of the annual poppies. There's a few others, but most of the stuff that's sort of is mass marketed to you at a garden center in a cold winter climate and labeled annual is not a strict annual and would live longer without a freeze. I think one thing you might to give you a clue, it is very hard to know, but you might also just Google where that species is native to. So if you're looking at sunflowers, they're native over, if it's labeled as an annual and it's native to a cold climate that has freezing winters, then it's probably a true annual. So like sunflowers or corn poppies or some of those other European annuals. And then if you're looking at petunias, they come from Brazil. They're probably not a strict annual. They're a short-lived, heavy flowering species, but can certainly live longer than a year. And if you take cuttings from your petunias every year, you can, they can persist for decades if you keep repropagating them.
I think
and there's also no. Go ahead.
I think the other thing to think about is that we tend to I don't know how all of what kind of gardening culture you all were raised in, but I think I was raised to kind of think of this like annual perennial binary, but the reality is that most perennials are not forever, right? Like there are some really long-lived species like Baptisia and peonies, but a lot of tropical and subtropical species especially, as well as disturbance species in other places, are only, 3 to 5 year species. And so in order to keep them going, even if they are technically perennial and like winter hardy in your zone, you're probably going to have to do the kind of techniques that Joseph's talking about, where you renew them every, couple of years, depending on their specific life cycle.
There's also the short-lived perennial, which might be sold as a perennial, but isn't going to live too long. There's also biennials, some of which are not strict biennials, I guess, that might live 3 years.
Yeah.
I don't know that's happened to me.
Yeah, I think it's the annual, biennial, perennial framework is it's a man-made construct we put on a continuous range of variation.
Super continuous.
Yeah. So all those things like, hollyhocks are biennials. Well, I would say they're short-lived perennials. And most biennials, things you're going to get as a biennial, if you deadhead them, you can usually get another year out of them. I think some of these like categories we learn, nature does not fit into neat little boxes. And there's always in between cases on all these things.
Mm-hmm.
I think what Joseph mentioned earlier about looking at kind of where these plants naturally grow in the wild, I would say even like as much as you can, trying to even go to that like finer level of detail. It's not only try to figure out like what country they're specifically from, but try to figure out what kind of an ecosystem they live in. So if they live in an area of high disturbance, then they're probably so that's like if they live on a cliff or if they live in a dune or somewhere else that's like really sandy soil, the individual plants are probably really not that long lived. Whereas if they live in a more stable ecosystem that has a lot less disturbance, like the middle of a prairie, then they're probably longer lived. So when we think about a lot of our like long-lived garden perennials are things like Baptisia that evolved in the like really deep soil of a tall grass prairie and will like chug on forever, but they're also really slow growing and they don't necessarily bloom a lot when they're young, right? But by contrast, a lot of things that are really showy and flower really well are those kind of higher disturbance species, but they devote so much energy to flowering that they, think about something like agara, like they flower themselves to death pretty quickly.
Huh.
I'm actually really excited because I saw there was Gara growing wild next to one of my clients' docks. We don't have it, or one of their boardwalks this week. We don't have it in the wild that often here. I thought it was more of a like Texas Gulf Coast species, but apparently it's either one that's like self-seeded or else there are some disjunct populations here. I don't know which. It feels like it should be native here, so I don't know.
Okay. What Dendro asks here, what type of soil do you usually purchase for landscape projects, or just generic bags of reclaimed earth? So I have a feeling, so Dendro's from the UK. I have a feeling this is very specific to where you are and where you're doing your project.
Yeah, definitely. It depends on your existing soil. And then also what you're trying to grow, right? So I'm usually trying to work with my existing soil as much as possible. Here in South Florida, we are on pure limestone sand that has a pH of typically 8.5 is our native soil condition. And so it has very low nutrients, almost no organic matter. So on spots that we're trying to grow, actual real tropical plants from places like Hawaii and South Asia, we will add as much of whatever your locally available compost is as possible because they're going to need that extra humus. They're going to need that extra nutrients. They want, to hold water a little better. So it depends on what you're trying to do. But, my goal typically in a planting design is to work with those existing conditions as much as possible. So starting, if you have a limey soil, start with stuff that likes limey soil and maybe add some organic matter or whatever your locally available thing is. In the UK, I know you have such an issue where, traditionally horticulture used a lot of peat. And we have that issue in the United States as well, but it's not as kind of dramatized. But try to use a local composted organic matter as much as possible using what's available to you, because it's probably going to have the lowest environmental impact.
Yeah, that makes sense. Another question from Dendro. What would be the main steps of creating a DIY stream in a back garden? Have any of you folks tried doing this yourselves?
So this is another one where I work with craftspeople who are really good at building. So typically I know a couple of people who have done them themselves. Water features are kind of a design nightmare. They're a consistent source of maintenance issues. And so whether you make them yourself or have someone else do it for you, just be prepared that it is going to probably be a lot of work to take care of. And you're constantly going to want to be, you need to maintain, you need to be ready that it is an actual, think about all the, like how many people who have a pool service that comes and services it every week. You are creating a miniature pool, whether or not you want to swim in it. So it's going to need a pretty high level of maintenance and monitoring. And go to YouTube.
Yeah.
There's a lot of water feature install things on there. But the level of reliability of what you'll get, I don't know, but I don't mean to be a pessimist about this, but you're signing up for a lot of work is kind of my short answer.
Well, I guess the first step could be think real hard if you want that stream.
Yes, think real.
Well, there's. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I mean, I think it's also possible to do something that anytime that you're dealing with flowing water, it's going to become a bigger issue. I think, in most of the United States, we have to think about mosquitoes for sure, but think about, is there something like a bird bath or some other kind of still body of water that you just tip out every once in a while that you don't really need a pump for? Because those can be really great for birds and other wildlife.
I just wanted to say that there's a lot of DIY videos and encouragement around DIY, but, in reality, you have to think, is it something that you feel comfortable doing and comfortable maintaining? And if there's a problem, can you take care of it?
Yeah. The orchid feature, the water feature that I just did in this client's, which I don't have a good photo of it in there, it was $30,000 to get that put in, and that was a pretty small water feature.
Yeah, cool. I bet that answers Dender's question.
I have another one that is like a single boulder that runs through that was $17,000 to put in, and properly maintain for that first year.
Oh. A single boulder?
A single bolt, coral rock, as long as it's heavy enough, you have to have someone actually pour a concrete foundation for it. And so digging the hole, getting the concrete foundation poured, getting the correct pump, getting everything plumbed, getting electricity run to it. Yes, for I think it's a 17-inch boulder. It was
17 inches, not even that big.
No, that's what I'm saying. It is not. Looking at the fountain, I was like, what? This is what they got for $17,000? You can buy self-contained fountain kits. There's a company, I think, in Michigan called Blue Thumb, and those are in the $2,000 to $3,000 range, and they send you everything in there.
That sounds like a bargain.
Yeah, they send you everything that you need. It's like a self-contained kit. So I would definitely look at those, because those are a little bit more approachable. But just when you're thinking about these kind of, water fountains, water features, ones that you see on TV and in public gardens and in fancy people's gardens are very expensive.
Yeah. Well, this kind of goes with his other question here about the safest way to run electrical cables under the soil in the garden to fountains, greenhouses, etc. I guess that takes. In your work, you would hire an expert to do this, not do it DIY. But it sounds like that is quite expensive as well.
Yeah, that's part of what makes it expensive, right? Is you want to make sure anytime that you're combining water and electricity, that needs to be safe. You don't want to electrocute yourself or your neighbors or, create an electrically charged pond that, I guess that would be one way of killing the herons and birds that inevitably come to eat fish out of a pond. But
you would have to do disposal. That's another kind of maintenance.
As well as all the fish in the pond.
Right. So don't if you are someone who's really good with handcrafts and knows electricity, and is comfortable with that, by all means do it. Typically, if you're running electric cable to a fountain of some sort, it will go inside a larger conduit that is actually insulated, but that electricity needs to be properly grounded. If there is any component of a fountain that I would say don't do yourself, hire someone who knows what they're doing to do, it would be the electrical component of it, because that's really where you're introducing the most risk, right? So yeah, ideally hire an expert, think about it a lot, or find a friend who's an electrician and talk to them about, what the safe procedure is to do that. Bribe them with coming over to do some garden work for them or something.
I'm a big fan of trying to find service bartering within your friend group.
Yeah, definitely.
I thought you were about to say I'm a big fan of bribing.
Well, whatever works, I suppose.
Hey, I would rather there be a bribe than have a death trap pond in your garden.
Yeah.
That is both my personal and professional opinion, by the way.
I think not electrocuting yourself in your own garden is probably a safe.
Step one.
Safe recommendation.
That is a result we all aspire to, not electrocuting ourselves.
Can you imagine if you went on a most haunted episode and it was someone who'd electrocuted themselves in their own garden? That's a haunted sight.
Wow.
Maybe that's the emotion they're going for in the landscape, is haunted.
That is true. If that's the feeling that you're going for, maybe see a counselor first.
Yeah, they're like a movie villain, right? So they just want to have that electrical moat.
Oh God.
This is going off the rails.
Well, I think that person might have the money to spend for good contractors, so that wouldn't be relevant to this question.
And also, if you are hiring a fountain end contractor, ask to see examples of their work, especially satisfied clients who have had that water feature for 3 to 5 years. Because most landscape contractors, if you ask them, can you do this? Their answer is going to be yes. But make sure that you've seen them do it before in a successful way, rather than you being their paid test case.
That's a good point.
You know what's interesting? Around here, I'm getting a lot of no's. We've been trying to find a landscaping company to do some hardscapes, and they say all they can do is, what's it called? Pavers, I guess, the ones that lock together.
Yeah.
And they will not do anything else.
So a lot of landscape contractors like those because they're like the easiest thing for them to install. Yeah. Do you live in an area that has a lot of regulations around like development and permitting?
Not that I know of.
I don't think so.
I haven't even heard permitting mentioned in relation to our project.
What material are you hoping to work with?
I would like natural stone for the patio, and I would also like a potager.
Of course.
Which, sounds fancy. Nobody knows what it is when I tell them. With something that looks like bricks for a path, but I would be okay with it not being bricks.
Oh, yeah.
It's just, you approach them and they're like, oh, I don't know what that is. I'm not going to do it.
I mean, we have that issue a lot here as well. But we tend to find that, like, if a contractor is able to lay pavers, they should be able to lay. Do you need it to be set in concrete, or is it going to just be sand set?
Sand is fine.
It should be pretty easy. I mean, it's a pedestrian, like, you're just talking about pedestrian spaces too, not a driveway, right?
No.
The liability is really low. Yeah.
Small space.
I'm trying to think about any reason why they would be having issues with it. What part of the country are you in?
I'm in Central Ohio.
Okay, yeah. I mean, you have good native stone too. So it's like getting stone shouldn't be an issue. I got really spoiled when I worked in Tennessee because natural stone was actually cheaper than pavers. And it's because we have, we're on the mountains, so there's stone everywhere. And so I got used to always being able to use natural stone, but I mean, in Ohio, that shouldn't be a problem at all. So send me an email and we'll figure out someone who can do it.
Oh, that would be great. I think there's just so much work for them right now that they can easily choose projects they want and projects they don't want.
Yeah.
Because nobody can travel for, since COVID.
Yeah.
And everybody's been putting money into their homes.
Yep. That completely makes sense.
All right, let's do one more question, Space Butler.
All right. Well, this is a complicated one, but let's see what you think. Jamin Gray asks, I'm considering using aluminum flashing to make myself a few raised beds. However, I see Google warnings about aluminum toxicity and warnings against aluminum leaching into the ground, stunting root growth. On the other hand, I also see that some people use aluminum pellets to lower pH. It sounds to me like the whole issue around aluminum is merely that it is acidic. And so if your soil is already acidic, you're over-acidify your plants and harm them. My soil, on the other hand, is alkaline, around 8.0. Aluminum lowering the pH by 1 or 2, even 2 points would be beneficial. Is acidity the only thing I have to worry about with aluminum? Or what are gardening blogs actually talking about when they refer to aluminum toxicity?
I can take a.
Oh yeah, Joseph, you take a stab at it, and if I have a different idea about some components of it, I'll hop in.
Okay. Well, I feel like there's they may be confusing multiple different forms of aluminum, which I think may be why what they're seeing online seems to be conflicting. So your aluminum flashing is going to be aluminum metal, often in like aluminum alloy, which is going to be pretty inert, and I think the chances of that leaching into your soil is pretty minimal. Aluminum toxicity in the soil is usually aluminum and other forms of aluminum salts. And usually that's only a problem in highly acidic soils because those compounds are pretty immobilized in more alkaline conditions. So I know where I grew up in Northeast Ohio, we did have aluminum toxicity in the soil sometimes because it was incredibly acidic soil, and there was a lot of aluminum in it. But I don't think that's a separate issue from aluminum flashing. And then when they're talking about using aluminum to acidify soil, I think what they're probably referring to is aluminum sulfate. And it's more the sulfur in that compound rather than the aluminum. I mean, that is used a lot to acidify soils. But it's not necessarily aluminum per se that's acidifying. It's more the sulfur and the way that compound interacts with the soil that's acidifying. So it's also used because aluminum is what makes hydrangeas blue. So if you're looking to make your pink hydrangeas blue, you want an acidifying compound that includes aluminum in it. So I think that they should be just fine using aluminum flashing in the garden. I don't think there'd be an issue with that leaching. And then there's different compounds, including aluminum, that are going to behave different ways in your soil that makes that's giving you this apparently conflicting information when you're looking online.
So I agree with what Joseph said, and I think that most like building products that use aluminum are that alloy with zinc. Aluminum flashing, though, is typically used for roofs, and so the edges aren't rounded in the same way that they are. So I would definitely use a specific aluminum edging product, especially because it's probably a little heavier. I know it's going to be more expensive than if you just buy aluminum flashing for a roof, but it's actually like the alloy would be formulated to go in the ground rather than, not be exposed. So I think that I would definitely use an actual landscape product rather than a roofing product. And also the other thing to be kind of aware of is that different vegetables absorb minerals. So whether it's aluminum or anything else, like different vegetables really absorb minerals in different ways. So I know that like carrots and celery are both really sensitive and like absorb a lot of minerals from the soil. And so those are the ones that you have to be really careful about if you're going to be putting them in soil that has any kind of contamination. Whereas like some kind of legumes and like I think a lot of leaf vegetables don't do that quite as much. So that might be an area that you want to do research in terms of which vegetables are the most sensitive to growing in contaminated soils. Joseph, do you know anything about that, or any of the rest of you?
I actually read a paper a while ago, and I'll fish down the link, that said it was actually a scientific paper, and it said that there wasn't nearly as much absorption as people were worried about.
Oh, okay.
But if you were in particularly bad soils, like where I lived, where people were told not to garden because there was that much arsenic and lead. In those conditions, plants like raspberries and squash, where the part you're eating is the fruit, those were the safest, and then root crops were the most, not a great idea. Yeah. But that was more because you really need to clean those roots to make sure you're not actually ingesting the dirt directly.
Arsenic and lead.
Yeah, it was up in Tacoma, and I can't remember the historical reason why the soil was polluted, but it had to do with manufacturing of something or other.
Joseph, didn't you say you have lead in your soil?
Yeah, so there is the new house from leaded paint. There is some lead contamination in the soil, and from what I've been reading, is the same thing. If you have contaminated soil, it's more about surface contamination of the soil getting on roots or leafy vegetables and washing them properly than it is about the plants actually uptaking them. Because usually if you have a fairly moderate pH and especially good organic matter, most of those minerals are bound pretty tightly to the soil and are not very mobile to actually move into plant material.
Okay, I know I said that was the last question, but we have one that really takes advantage of Caleb's presence, so I'm going to read it off here. How do you go about plant selection when you know the rest of the design? Are you selecting plants off your memory, list any tips for keeping track of color, texture, blooming timing.
Ooh. I make a lot of Pinterest boards. And so that, like, if I'm kind of thinking about, I'm working on a garden and I'm not feeling inspired for that thing, or I'm like, okay, what plant, would work in this place? I also am really lucky to work in a very collaborative office, and my boss, Lee, knows South Florida plants like crazy. So we very often are collaboratively designing. So we'll be like, oh, we're talking about this area. Hey, what about this plant? What about that plant? There's a really good resource called Plant Ant. Have any of you used that?
What is it?
No, I've never heard of that.
Plantant.com, and it is a nursery aggregator. So it lists, it's more for wholesale growers. Wholesale growers use it, and it lists all the nurseries in a specific region and what species they have.
Oh my God, that sounds heavenly.
It's a free thing that you can hear. I'll put it in the thing. It's a free resource.
I already did.
Okay, awesome.
Oh, thank you.
It is more directed for wholesale nurseries that are for wholesale growers and designers. So, the best way that it works is through botanical names, but you just put in the botanical name of what you want, the range of where you are, and it will list every wholesale nursery that has it, the size. If you have an account, you can see the wholesale price of it. Some of them have photos as well. So for me, that's a really I have to always, as a designer, you have to figure out not only what are you putting on the plan, but is this a plant that landscape contractors can actually get? So, I would love to use rare cultivars of this, that, and the other. But when I'm designing for a corporate landscape that is requiring, one of the biggest, we had a project last year that it had 51,000 plants that were planted in it. If you have to get quantities of 500, 1,000 of a specific species, you can't just have something that cistus is growing and Anne has propagated 10 of. You have to have
500,000. Oh my God.
No, 50,000. Sorry. 50,000, not 500,000.
That's still a lot.
That's a lot of plants. And so you have to be able to get those kind of quantities somewhere, right? And so you have to look and be like, okay, if only one nursery is growing this in the entire state of Florida, my possibility of getting that number of plants is probably pretty low. So I use that site all the time to be able to look and go, okay, also, is this plant available in a specific size? Because as a landscape architect, I'm working with codes a lot, and so those tend to have minimum sizes of trees. Again, I may want to use a really rare oak species, but I may only be able to get it in a 1 gallon or a 3 gallon or a 7-gallon pot. If my code inspector comes out there and it requires a 10-foot tree, and I've put in a 12-inch, 3-gallon, that project's going to fail, and we're going to have to install that actual size tree. So I use Plantant a lot as my resource to figure out, is the plant I'm specifying available in the size that I want?
How do you mentally keep track, or not mentally, maybe on paper, of when things bloom so that you know what combinations you will get? Do you use Pinterest for, different boards for different seasons?
Some for that. Honestly, maybe this might be like a southern to subtropical thing, but I don't think about I guess we have kind of warm season versus cool season, and then also dry season versus wet season, and so things kind of bloom that way, but I can't think through timing that precisely, I guess, is kind of more of what makes sense. And so things kind of, I guess I'm trying to create a design that works whether or not the plants are in bloom. And so it's almost like the bloom season is the least important thing for me, because I care more about whether the overall character of the plants go together.
That makes sense.
But when I've worked in areas where you're trying to do more specific, herbaceous border timing, I will create flow charts that basically are
oh yeah, I've seen those. Yeah.
And Excel, it's just a little diagram that goes, okay, this is, February, March, April, May. Is this plant likely to bloom in that time and what overlaps with each other.
Yeah, you color in the space of time that it blooms in, and you see what overlaps. Yeah, I've seen those. That's a great idea.
I'm trying to think, were there any other components of that question that I don't know. Like, I think that's something you have to kind of do over and over again. It's more of a skill that you build.
Experience.
Because it's like applied knowledge. But also, if two plants are going to look terrible together, they probably, like, just because they somehow overlap blooming, you probably shouldn't put them next to each other anyway. That's very context dependent again.
Yeah. And Evie that's who asked this question, is in zone 4. So the plants he's dealing with are quite different than the plants you're dealing with.
Things only bloom for 3 weeks anyway, so everything blooms together.
Exactly.
Sorry, I've never lived anywhere like where it got like really like, I don't know, where I grew up was like a zone 7. So I've never lived anywhere that's, I guess Kansas is the like really coldest place. And I was in design school then. And it was like, okay, you have grasses and then some things flower. Like, so I unfortunately don't have a good knowledge of how you plan for, seasonal design in really cold climates.
Mm-hmm.
I do know that you actually get really big blooms on things because you have such like short seasons, so you get really good flowers. Here, everything's kind of scattered. It's one bloom here and one bloom there.
Yeah, I think like northern gardens are flowerier.
Yes, definitely.
For lack of a better term. Like those zone 3, zone 4 gardens, it's snow most of the time, and when it's not snow, everything is just flowering like crazy at once, and it can be really
I did not know that.
Yeah. That's my impression. I feel like I'm a flower person over foliage, and I feel like tropical garden is always a little bit of a letdown to me.
I mean, it is. It's really foliage oriented rather than flower oriented. It's almost, we get some things like some bougainvilleas that will like completely cover themselves with flowers, but if you don't have, as a plant, if you don't have that limited period in which to flower, why would you put all your energy into making one big show of flowers when you could like spread that risk out over time? It always comes back to evolution.
Yeah.
Yeah. I have to say yay after that. It just sounds happy.
That was fun.
So
this is
time for riddles.
Riddle time. So I'll read off the riddles, and those listening live in event chat, you can post your guesses. If nobody comes up with anything, we'll ask our panel here what they think the answer to the riddle is. All right. The first riddle is: entrenched in Cibo Italiano, you'd think I'm native to the Med, but I am tropical by nature, and many nations I have fed. What do we got in the chat here? I think this is an easier one. Not a pineapple. No. Yes. Tomato.
No.
What?
It's not tomato.
It's not tomato? Okay, well, I don't know this one. You came up with it.
It's basil.
Oh, it's basil. Well, that's...
Wait, Lager Bear guessed that one.
Yes.
Yeah, both of them. This is...
Bear guessed it.
They go well together, I guess.
Is tomato tropical?
Tomato is native to... Isn't it Central and South America?
Yeah. I guess that does make it tropical. Oh, darn it. You poked a hole through my logic.
Luckily, both were guessed at exactly the same time by exactly the same person, so no problem whatsoever.
Good at these.
All right, riddle 2. Our blooms emerge from muddy depths with beauty that's for all to see. Once planted by a man to paint, now eyed by droves in Giverny.
I believe it's Giverny.
Oh, sorry, my pronunciation's not so good.
Oh, might have to replace my co-host.
Yeah.
It's not Mama's J. And no, I will not replace you, Space Butler.
Oh, okay. Well, it would be too, as your accountant, I would say that it would be too expensive to replace me.
Yes, lilies. Water lilies. Evie got it.
Yeah, water lilies.
Or should I say Evie does it?
Oh.
Can I have
you could say that.
Here? I'm going
yes.
Are you guys familiar with Carlos Magdalena? He's a water lily scientist at Kew, and you should read his book, The Garden Messiah, because he talks about going to explore for water lilies in rare tropical places. And his adventures are just amazing. Like, he would go to these like incredibly remote places and find, these rare plants that are super tiny. And like, just the way that he writes about them is so exciting. Like, he's a modern day plant hunter for conservation purposes, and it's wonderful.
Cool.
I think I read an article about was it a water lily species it's native to like one hot spring?
That's a calceolaria spring.
Yeah. Oh, that was a super cool little article. Yeah, he has some cool adventures. If that's what he does like on the regular, that is so cool. Yeah, because
he was the one who collected that one that someone stole, and it was one of like, a couple in the world, but he tells the whole story of like finding it and then conserving it that led up to the heist.
The heist?
Yeah, someone stole an itty-bitty one.
I should point out, he also, I believe he helped figure out how to propagate them from seed. And so since then, we've actually been able to get them growing not in that original hot spring, because unfortunately that hot spring was demolished for, I think, a laundromat. But now we have them growing in a bunch of different, greenhouses that are run by universities or conservation groups. So the species did have a pretty big bottleneck, and unfortunately you're not going to find it in the wild anymore, but it's not gone.
Wow.
That doesn't help any pollinators that might have really loved that plant, but I should say like the plant species itself is at least not extinct.
Yeah, I just put the link to the book in the chat. And like, I don't think he can't, like, I rolled my eyes when I saw the title because I was like, it's the most self-aggrandizing thing. But like, someone else forced him to put that title on it. He's like the most like self-effacing, like humble and excited guy who's like, I can't believe I get to have this cool life while I go around and look at all these rare plants. Like, it's a really awesome book. I loved it.
Oh yeah, and I think even when he was talking about like the opportunity to try and grow these incredibly rare plants out of that hot spring, like the seeds from there, and the person who I think was interviewing him for it was saying like, oh, like you did such an amazing job, like you did something nobody else would do, and he's like, well, no, not really, like I just kind of did trial and error, and I got the opportunity to do it, but anybody else really could have. So he's super down to earth, it seemed.
Wow. Okay. Very interesting. Okay, we'll go on to the next riddle. This one seems a little bit more difficult. Let's see. Dug and baked in temps so hot, bagged and sold for plant and pot. I don't know the answer to this one, so.
You do. I told you, but you forgot. Yes,
okay.
Bob's got it. Lekka.
Lekka?
Am I pronouncing it right? I don't know any other way to say it.
Just say it confidently.
Lekka. It's little clay balls.
Oh yeah, those things. The little popped clay balls.
Good job, Bubs.
All right. The next riddle. Once thought too slow without a bee, until one day it was made quick. The secret cracked by boy of 12 with nothing but his thumb and stick.
Silence. More silence.
This one is testing their little gray cells out there.
Oh, they're gray cells. I think it's time for the Poirot emoji.
Yeah, I have no idea about this one either. So you probably told me and I forgot.
I did tell you.
Yeah, that makes sense.
I mean, granted, I've been working on these riddles forever because they're getting increasingly harder to write. I am running out of ideas, guys. I don't know how much longer I can do this.
I don't know. It doesn't look like we've got any guesses in the chat here. Should we turn it over?
Any ideas?
Turn over the panel.
I have no idea.
All right.
I am.
Yeah?
No, I got nothing.
The process that is being talked about here is pollination.
Wait, is it vanilla?
Yes, it's vanilla.
Okay. One of my clients has vanilla orchid in her garden, and we're waiting for it to bloom so she can pollinate it.
Apparently those things grow like a weed.
Yeah, they're really frost sensitive, though, so here they're kind of, they can easily get knocked back if we do get a frost.
Yeah, as someone in zone 3B, I'm pretty sure I'll never be able to grow those outdoors.
I mean, with climate change in another 500 years.
How much do you want to spend on heating for your greenhouse?
Sky's the limit.
Cassie's all in.
Fly to Madagascar or Tahiti.
Yeah, it'd be cheaper.
It's an interesting story about this boy. He was an enslaved kid, and he figured something out that older adults in the business couldn't. Pretty amazing.
Oh yeah, I didn't realize he was that young.
I remember his name. Really should have written that down.
It wasn't part of the riddle, so it wasn't important. All right, moving on to the next riddle.
It's an important historical milestone.
It is. All right. Soft and renewable, axed, cut, and popped. Once in the neck, the CO2 stopped.
Nope, not cocoa.
No.
Bubs, you're going to have to be more specific than tree.
Yeah. Why would the answer be tree? This is too generic.
No, it's more specific than plant.
That's true. Not cotton.
No, but I suppose you could stop somebody breathing with that if that's what you're thinking of. Not tobacco.
Not tobacco. This one is clever, but a little bit difficult.
Oh my goodness. Okay, that went fast.
No, none of these. Maybe we should turn it over to the panel.
Yeah, let's try the panel.
Is it bamboo?
Silence. Not bamboo. I think you guys need to figure out what I'm talking about with the neck and the CO2 being stopped. I'm going to read some of these answers that are wrong for our audience listening later. It's not poplar, it's not lily of the valley, not willow, not jute, not poppy, not hemp, not a guillotine?
No, definitely not.
Not a mangrove.
I don't think a guillotine is renewable.
It's definitely not soft.
Kind of the point.
It's
not soft, no.
No.
Oh, true, it is reusable.
Mm-hmm.
I guess that's a sustainable method of doing a bad thing.
We got any clues here?
It is not a human neck I'm talking about.
Is the neck like a pedestal? Is it specifically like for a flower or the fruit? Or is it some other component of the plant that you're talking about?
It's not a component of a plant, and it's not a component of a creature.
Oh.
Not seaweed, not chicken, not kelp. A bottleneck, yes it is. Cork, yes.
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
Yes, a cork, soft and renewable, axe cut and popped. Once in the neck, the CO2 stopped. It's a cork.
God.
You know, it's actually, you guys should look up how cork is harvested. It looks so cool. It's like you just skin a tree.
Yeah, I watched YouTube videos to write this riddle. I did research.
It's like the strangest looking thing, but if you do it properly, the tree can bounce back.
It's pretty amazing. It is pretty amazing.
That sounds a little creepy.
Oh, it's super creepy, and I'm sure the tree is not happy about it at all.
Wow. All right, last riddle here. Known by Hippocrates, loved by the cat, long hailed as a chill pill, my oil smells real bad.
Not catnip. Bub's being really vague again, kind of like tree. She just says drugs. Not hemlock.
I think hemlock is Socrates, not Hippocrates.
Oh, yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Not salmon.
Salmon is loved by the cat.
I also really...
But fish oil probably smells bad, I'm assuming.
I don't know.
I just always really irritated my dad by pronouncing it Hippocrates.
I like
what
it.
If by a twist of fate that was his name's pronunciation?
Oh, wouldn't that be funny?
Yeah, I don't know if we know exactly how ancient Greek was pronounced.
Yeah. Not Poppy, not Olive. Is that the second time Jay has guessed Poppy? He just wants it to be Poppy.
Why not? Those are delicious as well. But poppy oil does not smell bad.
No. And olive oil does smell very good. No, not calendula or marigold. Too bad that Kami isn't here. I feel like he would have guessed it.
No, it's not. They're not getting a panel. You got any ideas?
Not catnip. Already said that. Not patchouli.
Mm-hmm. I think the third line you might be able to figure it out from.
Long hailed as a chill pill. Not chamomile. It's still largely used in many countries for calming and for sleep. But as far as I can tell, there's not any research supporting the efficacy. Valerian! Zappy got it.
Oh.
Yes. Okay. Apparently cats love it.
I think there is don't quote me on it. I thought there was a little bit of research, at least, there's research on it. I don't know how effective it's been shown with research, but it has been actively pursued.
Yeah, I think there's some mixed results in the research community about it.
I mean, I'm obviously an expert because I read the Wikipedia article, or at least part of it. So, yeah, it has been studied, but I'm not sure that there's been any results substantiating the claim.
Cannabis is an interesting choice. I don't know if cats like cannabis, but I mean that would hit the chill pill extremely hard on the head.
Oh,
I do think it was in a very unsuccessful dream tea that I took a while ago.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Valerian.
Yeah, I think it was Valerian.
There we go. Some evidence there.
It's very popular.
I remember we bought some once, and I had to throw it away because the stench, even in the box that it was in, I couldn't take it.
I don't know if I know. Is that the valerian oil that smells bad?
Yeah, comes from the root. From what I understand.
It doesn't taste very good either, I will say.
The flowers are diffused, at least. They're kind of pretty looking.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Thank you, everybody, for coming. Thank you to our lovely panel with Zappy, Passy, and Joseph, and Caleb.
Thank you guys so much for having me. This was really fun.
Thank you for coming. And thank you for our audience and everybody who asked questions. Bye.
Bye.
See ya.